Hey, we did it
Stream is
again. We
live.
managed to go live. All right. People might start expecting that I do this all the time. I don't know. Well, listen, everybody. Thanks for tuning in if you're watching this live. And if you're here on replay, we still like the fact that you're here. So don't worry about it. All right. So we're about to kick off the recording the episode 207 of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Here we go. 5, 4, 3.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today in episode 207 of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast?
This is going to be cool because we're going to talk about a role that most organizations really get wrong and that most people don't even understand what it is. It's the Business Information Security Officer, or BISO.
Yeah, I don't understand what that is.
Yeah, well, we're going to fix that. We're gonna know what it actually is, why it exists, and why the best BISOs spend as much of their time defending the business from the security team as they do pushing the security agenda onto the business. It sounds like they're fighting with a sword in each hand in two different directions. So this is going to be interesting. Now, I can't think of anybody better to do this with than we're going to have two guests for the very first time on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Never before tried. Let's see if we can do this. But we've got Brian Shea and Maggie Amato. Now, they were peer BISOs at Salesforce. They were embedded in different lines of business, but they provided, but by doing that, they got a rare and valuable perspective on the topic.
Well, welcome to the show, both Brian and Maggie. I've known you both. I've known Brian for a very long time. Maggie, I think we met for the first time in the last year or so. But welcome to the show.
Still wanted to come on the show. That's awesome.
Yeah, you did. Yes. So, Brian, why don't you start? Tell our listeners a bit about yourself.
Sure thing. So first off, thank you for having me. Very much appreciate it. It's good to talk to some old friends and some good friends. So I started in the role as a BISO after spending about 10 years working in GRC. And just historically speaking, I spent a total of about 11 years, 2 years at Starbucks and 9 years at Microsoft doing GRC work. But prior to that, I was 10 years in security. So as I came to the end of that, I had this opportunity and this role came up at Salesforce called BISO. And I thought, oh, that sounds good. That'll get me back to my security roots. And that'll really kind of reinvigorate my security career. So I decided to jump back out of the GRC side into the BISO role at Salesforce. And it did do that. It did, bring sort of security back to the forefront of my career, but it also did a number of things just around learning that business security interaction, right? That was something that was really, really interesting and appealing there, and very educational as well. So at Salesforce, I had two of the major lines of business that I supported as a BISO. So sort of our core CRM infrastructure, and then all of our availability and infrastructure engineering, which was about 11 EVPs worth of support. So there was a fair amount of work there. And I also got to deal with all things old. So the legacy infrastructure that was the core of the beating heart of Salesforce CRM that was written back in probably Mark's garage at some point, all the way up to the current cloud deployments, all happened to be in there. And then even up to and including touching base with supporting the AI that we were adopting as I was coming to the end of my tenure there. And so that was really interesting too, because it gave a wide spectrum of both the technology and security challenges associated. And I am currently the director of technical audit with the Expedia Group. So I'm running an audit team, which will be my first foray into the third line of defense arena. And I'm really excited about that. I'm 5 weeks in, so I won't be talking much about my experience there because you don't want to hear about onboarding videos and mandatory training.
Oh, and currency fluctuations.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that is interesting, Brian. At the ISC2 meeting last night, it would be last night when this is being recorded, as everyone knows. But we had a speaker talk to us about Enron, and so the audit function certainly has come a long way since those days.
Yes.
Okay, Maggie, how about you?
Yeah, background. I was at Salesforce past 4 years. Started there as enterprise BISO, and it was so great whenever it was a core issue because I could say not it. That's Brian's problem. Prior to that, I was at Dell running cyber strategy for John Simone's crew. And then I was at CBS Aetna, basically hired on to work on their cloud security program. This was when Aetna was migrating to the cloud. But prior to that, I was in the government for a really long time. I was at HHS. My whole job there was to basically ensure that we had resiliency from internal HHS that we could apply and send out to the private sector for public-private partnerships. And I was at the headquarters level, so talk about my first real experience being a BISO, NIH, CDC, FDA, Medicare, Medicaid, Indian Health, and nobody talked to each other. Imagine that. They all had similar problems. And then prior to that, I did spend some time at Booz Allen. I worked on the identity management, the electronic healthcare records process for the VA. And then I was in the intelligence community for a while. And then I started my career as Hatched Up the MITRE Corporation. My first gig was security architecture for the Navy. So throughout my career, I've definitely seen various lines of business and realized that the root cause is that people don't like to share vulnerable information with each other. And trust is built between humans and not entities. And so, how do I get people to share information about indicators of compromise? Well, let's have a conversation, guys. What's bad for NIH is probably not going to be great for CDC. And so maybe we should figure out common tooling. What is something that we can have across the enterprise that helps us share this information, and getting humans together to have practitioner conversations. Same thing at Aetna, multiple lines of business. Same thing I saw at Dell. This was whenever they had the Boomi and VMware and RSA acquisitions and moving from more hardware and services to SaaS-based. And then definitely at Salesforce, where you had multiple lines of businesses and central security, but whenever you're further removed from the business, you don't understand those nuances that impact the business and what they're trying to deliver. So at Salesforce, I was brought on to be enterprise BISO. My partner was the CIO's organization. Basically, customer zero is what they call it inside Salesforce. And really readying that team for the agentic change that was going to be happening. So it was prior to Sales and Service Einstein being GA'd. And then I moved over to the product side. I supported sales, service, field service, and then AI, cloud, enterprise, basically Einstein services, all of those. And then later on, I moved into the VP role and managed all of the 30 business units from the Salesforce product security side. So multiple different views, and basically realized that same challenges exist, and the nuances may be a little bit different, but the root cause is the humans need to have these conversations. And so we created a security council, similar to what I had done repeatedly at all these other various organizations, to just bring humans together and talk about, what's happening at Marketing Cloud and what's happening at Mule. You guys have similar problems. Hey, Brian, Core's a responsible party. Can you help us influence here? And so bringing the stakeholders together to have those conversations was really the game changer. What I'm doing now, I'm actually operating as field CISO for a company called Qualitest. That's one of the things that I'm doing. I've written a book since my time off, like we've talked about. I'm also advising multiple companies on product roadmap. Trust 3 AI is a really great governance and AI platform with secure of a solution for the Salesforce drift issue that came out. It's file protection, monitoring, scanning for apps. So I'm really loving these things. Qualitest, one of the reasons I'm there, and I'm sure, Brian, we have the same thing, is we want to just work with great people and solve interesting problems. And so what I've seen at Salesforce is I can secure something all day long and velocity of the business, but it can't be 4 different lines of business when it comes to developer security, quality, performance, testing, availability. It needs to all be in one. And so with this company, I'm able to have these conversations and streamline a lot of the problems that I've seen inside Salesforce and other companies. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
Well, Brian, I think you are dismissed. We'll just talk to Maggie.
All right, signing up.
Actually, that was the whole episode. Thanks, everybody.
We're pretty much done. Everyone, thanks for joining us. Yeah. So,
well, you both have a lot of experience working at scale, which is great. But I think we need to go back to the basics for a moment. So, Brian, when we were doing show prep, you told me there's no standard definition for this BISO role across industry. So, so what is a BISO from your experience?
Sure. It's an emerging role. Like, you're starting to see it appear more in regulated industries. You're starting to see it sort of become more standard, or at least more common. And I think if you start to see it become common in regulated industries, that will drive standardization. But really, there hasn't been a sort of a defined role that is a BISO, right? So they kind of come in multiple flavors. The flavor of Salesforce was we were sort of junior CISO, right? And the goal there was have a single point of contact through which difficult conversations between the business, security, compliance, audit can happen, right? Because rather than driving those through separate disparate communications channels, having a single unified communications channel allowed us then to sort of see horizontally rather than just vertically when it comes to the problems, the issues, and who's experiencing them. And so with that as sort of the framing, we were set up in our particular role to be, and intentionally so, individual contributors. We didn't have a team of security people working in the BISO organization underneath us, but rather our goal was to get the engineering teams, to get the product teams to embrace and understand that security and risk management are in fact their jobs. And if we externalized that resourcing, then it became sort of a blame game that you could see. So in that sense, we were a small but mighty team of people that were highly connected, but we were also dependent upon influence to get anything done, right? I couldn't order my team to do something and have it expect that it happens. I had to ask for resources from other teams. And so in doing that, it really became sort of a very broad exercise in organizational influence. How do we get disparate teams to come together and have a viewpoint that we could at least all see and agree on the viewpoint, if not necessarily the outcomes? Then we could have those how to and what happens next conversations. So it was a lot of contextualization, a lot of just relationship building, and I think leadership in my view, and I think Maggie touched on this as well. Leadership is a human thing, right? It happens between people. There's no way this is going to be replaced.
It's in the emotional realm.
That's right. And in fact, all decisions do ultimately get made independent of the data that you have. Almost all decisions are made from an emotional standpoint, just based on how the brain works.
That's just a human thing.
It's just a biology thing. But the good news is, if you understand that, you can also understand how, when you approach people and you get that instant, oh, you're security, I can't talk to you reaction, you start to have to break that down, right? You have to say, like, okay, hold on, and so that's part of the building of the trust, right? When you walk in the room and somebody says, and I, as I said, I'm in audit now, and I can already feel that, ooh, audit, and everything gets quiet. Right? So how do I break down that trust barrier, right? And get to the point where it's like, we're actually after the same thing, right? Which I think ultimately started how this worked out, was understanding that we're all after the same business objectives. And really, we're just talking about the how we get there and what we do to achieve it. That really forced the conversation out of us versus them and got it into a technique conversation as opposed to an objective conversation. And I thought that was very helpful. I think the BISO role in other organizations that I've seen organizations where the BISOs have whole teams where they go and execute. They work with vulnerability management. So there are different variants of that role. And I think the way I kind of understand it, there's sort of two drivers behind that. One is organizational tolerance for how much money and spend are we going to put in security, and then also the chartering of the team, right? So does security still want to drive all security, right? I've worked for CISOs who adamantly said, every piece of anything that talks about security will work for me in the security organization. Therefore, I have to have it all. I've had other CISOs and chief trust officers that said, I'm okay with the distributed and a more matrix model. And I think that influences heavily how BISOs get deployed into organizations and what their charter is.
So, Maggie, before I ask you whether that matched your experience or if the role looked different, I think I'll just add that one, it's not a hands-on keyboard. You're not down there in the trenches messing with firewalls or anything like that. That's not what a BISO does. What it sounds like is you're a translation layer, kind of like how I see myself, right? My whole like value proposition was when I first met you, Brian and Kip, was to be that translation layer between security and the general counsel, right? That is necessary. And a BISO seems like the translation layer between the business and security. Is that a fair, characterization in a way?
I think it is. I think I did a lot. So you have to have the enough technical knowledge to detect when the smoke screens go up, right? But you don't have to be able to configure the firewall. And that's sort of the layer in which I think the BISO typically works.
Then that is exactly the same as how I have talked to in my role as outside counsel. Okay, Maggie, we've got dogs.
My apologies.
I didn't do it.
I didn't do it. Maggie, how about you?
Yeah, so similar, I would say, to Brian, right? Like, and the whole philosophy, and I've seen it, the philosophy has to be real, right? Like, you eat culture for breakfast. And so if you view security as a blocker, right, and that's how the security organization is run, is like, I'm your stop sign, then the relationship with your developers and with your product team is like, you have to change that. And so I've seen where a lot of the issues with security and developer organizations have to overcome is on that trust piece. Like, security is a cost center every single time. And so my job wouldn't exist unless there was a line of business. And so my job is to securely enable that line of business so that they can unleash themselves and be as productive as possible while reducing their cost to serve and increasing like their productivity overall. So going into places like a Salesforce where speed, velocity, accuracy, right, is key. I can't be a stop sign. I can't have 4 meetings to move something forward, right? I need to be able to understand the technical details and be able to align with them appropriately and embed my team with them so that we're meeting the speed of the business and innovate with them. And so I think that in other, companies like where you have a Dell, where it's, every single business unit security officer is essentially operating as a CISO with their own security teams and then using central security as a shared service, right? Then you have healthcare regulatory environments who operate similarly. I think tech sector is different. And so it's not highly regulated, right? There is some areas of it that are highly regulated, like GovCloud and, HIPAA compliance and PCI and things like that. But for the most part, we're meeting, ISO certifications, we're meeting, just normal European Union laws and just things like that. So they can move a lot faster. And so we need to understand the line of business and what, is it on-prem? Is it first party? Is it, core? So that whenever we make security changes or introduce new security policy or introduce security vendors, we're not impeding or giving developers more toil and impacting their cost to serve. And so sometimes it's like security is definitely seen as a blocker. And our job is to make sure that not only are we influencing them and showing them that we aren't, we are their partner, but we are making sure that we're influencing them to do the right work, right? So as Brian was saying, if you have, compliance and you have security assessments and then you have, another vulnerability management, all these different angles of security hitting your business unit, that is time away from them hands-on keyboard developing, Claude developing whatever we're using, right? But it's time
Vibe
away
coding.
from what their job is. And so we need to ensure that we're shifting left as far as possible, educating the business, the developers, like, hey, this is risk. The more you understand that you own this risk that you are entering, I don't own it. I'm not a risk. We don't own your risk. We help you manage your risk. Like, we are here to enable you
Right.
to produce less risk. And that is all dependent on that specific business unit, what tooling they're using, what they're, from pull request, what do they have as far as integrations, where are things landing? And that's all nuances based off the business unit and where they're driving, right? B2B, B2C, core, et cetera. So I think it's just making sure that we're aligning with them so that we have the relationship, so that we know, A, they're calling bullshit. We can push them harder because we are security and this is a big risk. Go now. You're going to get it done in one sprint. You're not going to do 4 sprints for this thing. And like articulating the rationale, right? It's not just security said so. It's the rationale behind this. And then also, how do you prevent this from happening again? And teaching them and partnering with them on how. So
Yeah.
it's been a great time working with the teams, and now I get to go do it elsewhere.
It sounds a lot like an assistant CISO, right? Like in the same way that you have an assistant general, like you have.
Yeah,
assistant
it's like a deputy CISO for each.
Yeah,
of them,
yes, and sorry, assistant
Yeah.
in lawyer speak, assistant general counsel is like the same thing as the deputy. It just depends on the company. AGC is what we would say. So, and that really sounds to me like what the BISO is like we've realized that the CISO role is just too big. And what we're doing with each BISO is slicing off a chunk of what is really a CISO's function, but we're focusing you. So that actually is a really helpful way to think about it. And I think it makes a ton of sense, right?
And it doesn't work in smaller scale organizations, right? You can't afford to have.
You wouldn't need it.
That happen.
Arguably.
And
yeah.
As a fractional CISO, sometimes I would like in like an upper mid market company, right? Like a company with like $700 million of annual revenue. You're just teetering on that edge, where you've got all these different lines of businesses, and I would love to have a BISO or two, in a situation like that. But the fact that I'm fractional means they don't even have a CISO on board. Right. So it's just not going to happen. Okay,
yeah,
so
the CISO runs the gamut, right? Like the BISO. So you're influencing your EVP in engineering, you're influencing product, but you're also influencing your engineering directors and your engineering managers, right? On like, here's how you do this, but like also executives, this is why we're influencing you to do this, and we need your team to pivot on this work, right? So it's all partnership and making sure you're doing the
but it's not all straightforward, is it, right? Because like Brian, you were telling me that risk profiles differ even inside the organization, right? So an internal platform holding customer data that's accessed through upstream applications, well, that's a completely different risk exposure than a customer-facing user interface, right? So, and that's just 2 examples, but so this is something you've got to constantly be paying attention to. So I was hoping people would, if you'd walk us through that, would really help people understand like what the BISO landscape really is like.
Sure, and I look at this through the BISO becomes a specialist in some ways by understanding very much the technology that they support, especially in the largest organizations, right? You have some potentially wildly different lines of business with very different risk profiles, even within the same company. And as you go down that path, what happens is the BISO digs into those technologies that are part of their line of business, and they are able to outsource some of the knowledge of those other lines of business because it's not directly applicable except where there's interconnectivity. But as a general rule, I worked on what Megan referred to as core technologies, right? They were deep down the tech stack. There was very few of my things that reached out and touched the internet. And because of that, the risk profile was different. It was mostly insider risk, availability risk, things that happened inside the company. There was zero trust. So of course we assumed breach, but at the same time, I wasn't like getting hammered by web attacks every day. However, pivot one BISO over and they're spending all of their day at the UI and web layer. They're just every day is about vulnerability management, exposure management on the web. And so they have a very different profile of the kinds of risks that they were dealing with and how urgent those risks needed to be reacted to. Conversely, the platforms that I managed literally held all of the customer data that Salesforce ingested. So the keys to the kingdom, the pot of gold was sitting under my purview. So it was a whole different sort of risk profile, because if something bad happened in my space, it was very bad, right? It wasn't just a website went down. It wasn't denial of service kind of things. It was, we lost customer data. We had an exposure. And so it was a whole different kind of risk profile that I had to manage. And so the defense in depth strategies that we used and the risk management strategies that we used would shift depending on exposure. Well, if you take that and you move that into smaller companies, different verticals, the same would hold true. Like, and now that I'm at a new company, what we manage is different, and the risk profile and the tech stacks are different. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, the problem statements still kind of boil up to the same things. Like, how do we understand our risk? How do we communicate that? And how do we prioritize that against the urgency of moving the business forward? And how do we, so those stay common, but one click underneath that, and it really starts to break out into a lot of specialty areas and a lot of uniqueness, which I also think is why partly the BISO role is becoming popular, but it has been hard to get a standardized view, because almost all those BISO roles become tailored to the organization in which they operate.
Right. And
because of that, correct. And so because of that, you really end up at a place where it's like, it would be hard for me to say, well, I'm going to go out and interview 100 BISOs and we're going to find all the things that are super common. And there are those things, but they sound really Visio diagram level, right? They're like, oh yeah, okay, arbitrarily, and we all work in security, right? Cool, big box around that. Yeah. But when you really start clicking into what's the skill set that makes this BISO functionally effective in this organization and with that tech stack, there's a lot of specificity that comes into that, which I think contributes to that lack of standardization.
Yeah. The word that I'm thinking about right now is judgment, which is, you know, kind of like the locus of responsibility for the BISO, the way you and Maggie are describing it. And it turns out that judgment is actually a good way to guard against being eliminated by artificial intelligence, because judgment is one of the things that generative AI isn't capable of doing in the way that we need it now, and I don't see it in the near future. So anyway, so I've been thinking a lot about that. But Jake, you wanted to ask a question about legal compliance, right?
Yeah, I do. And real quick, because I realized, Kip, that the script is probably 3 episodes, which, you know, typically you and I joke that, oh, did we have enough content, you know, in our script?
No, you always worry about that.
I guess I do worry about that. Well, this time I'm not worrying about that. This time I'm worrying about how many episodes actually are contained in this one script. So I will ask this quickly. Yes.
Okay.
From a legal and compliance angle, like, we already, you know, different lines of business are going to have different control postures. So how do you keep the overall organization, you know, quote, compliant, depending on what that even means? Like, it seems like, I mean, it will get complicated fast. And that's for both of you.
So you guys,
Maggie, do you want to start and I'll jump in? Or
you go. Yeah, go
okay.
ahead. Yeah.
It's a challenge, I guess, is the simple version of that, right? So it's like compliance is often viewed as a yes/no answer, right? Are you compliant? Are you not compliant? And on maybe an individual control operation basis, that becomes true. However, when you operate hundreds or thousands of controls, compliance is no longer a yes/no answer. It's a statistical sort of outcome. And so then you start weighing into the how effective does my control need to be to manage within my risk tolerance is not a yes/no answer, right? That's very much a measure, apply, and to Kip, to your point, use judgment. And so as you go through this, the role of the BISO, one of the things that I found both challenging but particularly interesting is you are uniquely situated in the organization to understand the business objectives equally with the security and risk management objectives of the organization. You are probably one of the few people in the organization that hold both kinds of knowledge and utilize it daily. And because of that, you're not getting a quarterly briefing or a monthly briefing. You're living it every day. And as you do that, you absolutely, there's 2 things that become, and I'm sure we'll dive into this, but the 2 things that become absolutely essential is both sides of the equation have to trust that you have the best interest of the company in mind, even if you are arguing that the best interest of their project or their work effort might not be the best thing to tackle right now, right? And that's a fine line to walk, right? I'm doing the best thing for the business, even though I'm telling you no. And they're like, but this is important. Yes, it is, but so is that other thing. And by the way, that other thing's even slightly more important, right? So I think it really boils down to, as you get into these compliance topics, understanding that, first of all, if anybody talks to me, they'll know I am a firm believer that there's no such thing as compliance as overhead, right? In my mind, compliance is directly related to the profitability of the company because it puts downward pressure on the cost of operating the business. You create operational efficiency, you avoid fines, you stop rework loops from happening by governing your systems well. And that means you are directly contributing to the profitability of the company by controlling costs where somebody else is driving more of the revenue side of the line. If you don't put downward pressure on that bottom line, you can make a lot of revenue and spend it all keeping your systems up or paying fines and so forth, and you're actually not a profitable company. So in my mind, you are living in a world where you are directly contributing to the success of the company by ensuring that they do what they're supposed to be doing, when they're supposed to be doing it, and where they're supposed to be doing it. Now, the nuance there is, it's easy to say that, right? You go, oh, it's just a template, just pack it over the top and everybody will get it. It's like, no, there's competing objectives, there's resource lacks, there's funding issues. So really at the end of the day, like I said, it comes back to that human element of when you talk to your EVPs, when you talk to your security leadership, they have to understand that while you might be disagreeing with them, you ultimately still have the best interest of the company in mind, and that you are a trustworthy advocate for the positions that you are taking. If you lose that as a BISO, you either become a hurdle for security or you become a hurdle for the business. And neither of those are places that you want to be, because it ultimately then you become less effective as a BISO getting things done for one side of the operation or the other. And Maggie, did you want to jump in and add any color to that?
No, I think that's great.
Okay. That was a rainbow, Brian. Yeah. There's no room for more color. But I want to jump down the topic outline to something that I think listeners will be very unhappy if we don't talk about it, which is defending the business from security. As much as they push security, a BISO, right? It's both ways. So help us understand, why is that true? Because I think, based on what I've heard so far, based on my conceptions, it just seems like the BISO would just naturally be the advocate for cybersecurity at all times. But help us understand when that's not a good idea, and what have you seen?
So I think I'm guilty of saying that phrase, so I will start. Maggie, please feel free to weigh in as you need to. But each line of business has essentially an annual plan and a budget and what they're trying to accomplish on any given year. And in most large companies, those things are loosely correlated amongst the lines of business. And so when you get to the point where security has objectives, security has things they think are important, and those are competing with business objectives for the same resource, for the same time, or for a release cadence, right? In the case where you have I have only so much stuff I can fit into a release, how much of that is security versus how much of that is product improvement. That tension is, I'll say this, poorly understood by many security operators and also poorly understood by the business. And so one of the things that I think I found success doing is when I was able to tell the business, I'm going to tell security no on your behalf because what you are working on is truly more important to the business than the risk that is being exposed by security. However, I will defend you now, not forever. This is still important, and therefore it's a prioritization and when, not if problem. So, dear business, I'm going to say no today, but because I say no today, I want your commitment on when yes is the answer, right? And that way we can negotiate and use that power of moving the pieces to get everybody to agree on a schedule, but it also gives them impetus, like, hey, you're buying me time here. I got credits in the bank for being a good guy on that, right? I didn't push back your release, or I didn't cause a feature drop, but I'm going to use that credit later to say you still have to do it. So now you owe me, so to speak, an answer to this. And so when you go through that process and when you do that, sometimes I've literally had conversations with folks who said, I put this on my performance plan. I promised this to my VP. Therefore, you have to do it. My answer was, I don't. I quite literally did not make those promises. And because you didn't ask and coordinate with us, I cannot guarantee the delivery on your schedule because my cloud has different priorities. Like that challenge is very real. And it is a very nuanced and difficult discussion sometimes, especially when people are talking about promises to executives or part of performance planning, right? They're like, I could not get paid if this doesn't happen. Like, then my suggestion would have been pre-coordinate, right? Like, don't just try to bully your way through, right? And I came up, I'm old enough to be where back in the day, security used to be the we say you do security model, right? It's like we write the policy, you do the policy, and we'll beat you until you get it all in, and that's
we've got a separate podcast episode just about that.
Yeah. And I don't think it was ever truly functional, but it's what we tried to do because we didn't know better. But as we've matured and as security as an industry has grown, I've seen a lot more acceptance of the idea that we are not the highest order bit in any of these things. And even if you're a security company selling security product, you still have to produce features. You still have to make your customers happy. So pure play security, while absolutely essential, is almost never the single highest bit on the business prioritization. And if we don't know that and don't accept that, it is really hard to come to that alignment with the business.
What do you think about all that, Maggie? Do you have a similar or different perspective?
Yeah, similar. I think that like over the course of my career, having, like I said before, you eat culture for breakfast kind of deal. Like if you have a security organization who the mentality is, I am the stick, I'm security, I'm the hammer, you'll have to do everything I say when I say it because I'm security. It loses security credibility because then security becomes the fire. And like the whole point is to never become the fire, right? Prevent fires from happening at all costs. And so I've had amazing examples over the course of my career of, like I said, just bringing humans together, and carrots work a lot better than sticks, right? And my grandma told me you catch more flies with honey than you do vinegar.
That's our job. Our job is the lawyers is to be the
lawyer. I was like, that's what I mean. I was like, the lawyers are the sticks, like you guys do. And that was easier for me too. Like if there were debates about risk that we couldn't get out of between security and the business, it was great to have our legal partners come in, right? And be like, legal, you be the bully. I'm a business partner here. These are the risks that we've identified. This is the reality and the impact of the business. This is what we can actually address in this time frame.
Oh, you're a tattletale,
right?
Man.
We're just.
I'm not a tattletale. I think it's a great partner.
I mean, lawyers are used to being bad cop.
Yeah,
so bring the bad cop when you need one.
And then audit, make friends with my audit buddies. Hey, smoke signal over here.
Audit's actually worse cops than lawyers. Nobody likes audit as far as I can tell.
CISOs have to be friends with everybody, okay?
Yeah, we never let audit people on the podcast.
Is my screen about to go dark?
Audit
has Actually, it's going to publish without you completely. You think you're in the episode.
Yeah, this is just a straw man.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, I would say BSOs can be like, the most popular, unpopular people at times because we have to be in those very sticky conversations that are based on human judgment and, reality is the best place to be, not hypothetical. And so whenever you're able to defend the business to security and say, not now, but this is when we'll do it. And here's the data and rationale of what we can take on and when we will take it on and why. Like you build credibility with both partners, right? So it's not just, well, Maggie said so or Brian said so. It's like, here's their backlog of work. You want to do this, we can do it this time. And if you want to break it up in chunks, we'll start here, right? But we're only going to be addressing the real risk to this business unit. And then the rest is, pie in the sky. And we will do that whenever we have time, which is, 27B, right? Like we're not doing it right now. And so I think that whenever the BISO is able to then negotiate on behalf of the business and security, it helps bring the trust together, because in overall security helps to understand the pain points of the business and their processes, which are different than other BUs that we may have within the same company. So I think it's more bringing them along and making sure that you're building trust and not cutting people off and only holding all that information and knowledge, right? Like the BISOs need to bring everybody together, because that knowledge needs to transform and shift left over time. So that operating procedures, everything gets up to date.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Jake, you were talking about fiduciary dimensions of this, right?
Yes.
Like how they have to be a fiduciary for two principals.
Yes. Is there a legal fiduciary duty at the BISO level? That I'm not actually sure, because I mean, you'd have to be covered by the E&O insurance policy to likely be considered, someone an officer or an executive that has that actually owes a fiduciary duty. I don't know if that's the case for BISOs.
Well, I don't think legally, no, but I mean, isn't that kind of in practice what's going on though?
Yeah, but the legal distinction matters a great deal.
Okay.
Because you should always do your job, right? But there's being able, I think putting a fiduciary duty on, it wouldn't be fair given how Brian started some of this conversation saying how they don't actually have a team. You can't actually order anyone around. It's really difficult to put someone who has persuasive authority rather than hard authority into a position where they owe a fiduciary duty. They just can't. They might owe the duty. They can't necessarily make it happen, right? So that would not be fair. But noticing the time, Kip, I was hoping that since we're clearly not going to get to Section 3, Section 4, or Section 5 of our script here.
No, we're pretty much done here.
Well, yes, but I think you should ask Brian to really talk about the title of this episode, right? What does it mean to defend the business from cybersecurity? Yeah.
Well, we just did that actually, unless Brian wants to add anything else.
No, I think that's fairly accurate. We cover it pretty well, because there are times where security will become insistent, or where their risk data does not align, or haven't looked at the business side of that. And so when you think about this, and I kind of think fairly simplistic terms, cost, risk, benefit, right? So you have a cost of doing and a cost of not doing, and you have associated risks that you're going to undertake in either case, right? The cost of change, the risk of change versus the risk of not doing it and possibly living with a security event. That, when I say defend the business from security, oftentimes it really means go to the security team and say, I understand why you think this is important, but prove to me why it's so urgent that it means stopping a $10 million feature release, or we've made customer commitments and we have legal obligations that are coming up with people getting contracts and buying product on the promise of these changes. Are you sure that we need to put that out and change, right? And sometimes it is literally unawareness.
Yes. You're ensuring at an organizational level, you're ensuring that the tail isn't wagging the dog, is the way that I often say this type of thing. And you see that in organizations where where enterprise support departments are so isolated that they forget that they exist to serve the entity as a whole rather than themselves, right? I think it's almost it's a trope, really, that the IT department that forgets that the business of the business is not to provide a purpose for the IT department, but to do the business, right? And and so I think that is really I think the way that I would simplify
we call them self-licking ice cream cones.
Yes, self-licking ice cream cones.
I love that.
Yes, I've heard that before. I always forget about that one, but it's perfect. It's a perfect. Phrase.
This is a great time for me to wrap this up. This is a wonderful conversation. We could easily do a part 2 and a part 3, and maybe we will. Folks, you can let us know if that's something you'd like to hear. But I'm going to wrap up this episode, and just by saying that we talked about what a BISO actually does, why the role is a direct extension of the CISO into each line of business, and why the best BISOs defend the business from security as much as they push security when it's needed. Anyway, we did all that with our guests. We had Brian Shea and Maggie Amato. They were two former BISOs who worked all this magic at Salesforce. So Brian and Maggie, can I put your LinkedIn profile URLs into the show notes in case people want to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you next